Welcome you to Hyderabad Academy of Pathologists, Basavatarakam Oration 2020. Hyderabad Academy of Pathologists, or HAP, has been founded to mutually learn and share the knowledge and updates in pathology practice, transgressing the boundaries of geography, affiliation, whether it is private, government, academia, or industry. So we are here to learn together across all borders. As the Secretary of Hyderabad Academy of Pathologists, I, Dr. Sudha Murthy, have the privilege of welcoming you all to this prestigious oration. Mrs. Nandamuri Basavatarakam, wife of late Sri N.T. Ramarao, the legendary Indian actor and politician, former CM, was a visionary. And Mrs. Nandamuri Basavatarakam was a great philanthropist who had succumbed to cancer, and she desired, before she passed away, that cancer patients in this country receive the best treatment here in India, irrespective of their economical status. And that is how Basavatarakam Indo-American Cancer Hospital was born. This oration has been instituted in her memory under the auspices of Hyderabad Academy of Pathologists. Now, to introduce the speaker, may I request Dr. G. Swarnalatha, President of Hyderabad Academy of Pathologists, to please do the needful. Thank you.
Thank you, Sudha, for those words about HAP and the Hyderabad Academy of Pathologists and this Basavatarakam oration. I welcome you all to this oration of the Hyderabad Academy of Pathologists, and I have this privilege and pleasure of introducing my friend, philosopher and guide, Dr. Sundaram, to this audience. Most of you would know her as a colleague, a teacher, and certainly I think all of you would have heard her on stage. But I just go through the tremendous achievement of Dr. Sundaram in the field of pathology. So Dr. Sundaram did her MBBS and MD at Andhra Medical College and moved to Hyderabad, where she actually joined as initially as an assistant professor at the Gandhi Medical College. But very soon, the Nizam's Institute of Medical Sciences opened as a new super specialty hospital in the city. And Dr. Sundaram joined this as a pathologist and as a consultant at NIMS. And she probably was amongst the first few in the state to take up a subspecialty interest in neuropathology. She trained in UK, returned, and then worked tirelessly to build up this department and the specialty at NIMS, as well as in the rest of the country. Her academic achievements have truly been mind-boggling. Over 350 papers, edited 3 books, contributed 24 chapters, and innumerable number of platform presentations. This oration is just one of the many orations that Dr. Sundaram has delivered. But she has never shunned other responsibilities as well. And this is evident from the many positions that she has had in academic bodies and societies, including President of the Neuropathology Society of India, past President of IAPM, both the state and the national chapters, and many more. But above all of us who have worked with her, all of us who have worked with her, seen her at close quarters, know her as a very warm, compassionate individual, extremely disciplined, who's very upright, a no-nonsense type of person, and very, very passionate about the subject. I mean, it is these qualities, I think, which have endeared her to all of us and which sort of make her, I think, most appropriate and the most suitable for giving this oration, which is titled Ethics and Integrity in the Practice of Pathology and in Research. So with these words, we will go over to the oration. I once again thank you all for coming, and I'm sure it will be worth your time. So over to the oration, Sudha.
Good afternoon, everybody. I feel privileged to be delivering Basavatarakam oration. She is a great lady, and the institute established in her name is providing quality cancer care to lakhs of people every year. I thank the executive and members of the Hyderabad Academy of Pathologists for bestowing this honor on me. When Dr. Swarnalatha asked me to speak about ethics and integrity in pathology, I was wondering what I should speak. These are the way of life, and these are the values we inculcate from our parents, teachers, in school, college, and then with our interactions in society. But it is very important to assess these our practices against these values with the changing times. So I thought I'll share my experiences in pathology practice, as I was practicing pathology since nearly last 40 years. Ethics and integrity, they define a person, they reflect on one's character and personality, and they show our commitment to science and society. We enter the medical profession with the Hippocratic Oath. The basic principles remain the same, though centuries have passed since the Hippocratic Oath. The patient's interests are most important, and doing good and not doing harm is the most important thing. We exercise our professional skills bound by a set of principles. This is what I call dharma, to attain the ultimate. Here the ultimate is patient's interest, and the ethics is the dharma. Ethics are applicable to every facet of life. In medicine, they are mostly applied between the guidelines are there of the interaction between a clinician and a patient, but they apply to all aspects of medicine. And today I will be speaking about the ethical practice as applicable to histopathology. Tissue diagnosis is considered gold standard because decisions about diagnosis, treatment, prognosis, and prediction to treatment depend on histopathology report. Ensuring quality and integrity of lab services, maintaining individual competence in judgment and performance are of utmost importance. So, histopathology report has to be objective, scientific, and minimally subjective. As is our pathology, so is our practice. We have a duty-trust relationship with patient and the clinician, and also with the people with whom we work in the department. So, we have a responsibility to the patient, an obligation to the society, interaction with our colleagues, technical staff, and supporting staff in the department, and a communication and being a part of the team for patient care with the clinician. We try to achieve all these things by providing quality of service, competence of interpretation, improve the body of scientific knowledge by research, promote high standards of education and practice, collaborate with colleagues. Maintaining quality of examination results is a very complicated and a challenging issue, and the quality assurance cycle has to be efficient and effective. There are many nuances in maintaining a lab, and the tests have to be performed under defined conditions, and implementation of appropriate pre and post examination processes is very important. Calibration of the equipment, maintaining the kits and stock, and then following SOPs in letter and spirit are very important. And quality is everyone's responsibility. It is a teamwork. Right from the time we receive a sample, label it, fix it, gross it, process it, section cutting, and staining, all these are important in making a final report in histopathology. So the laboratory procedures have to be really maintained with efficiency, and we have accreditations systems to apply to laboratory practices. So it is a badly processed sample or an improper grossing. These are irreversible, and they seriously affect the reporting on in histopathology. Not enough quantity of fixative, or too little, or orientation, and if the clearing is not good in processing, or a bad section, all these can lead to erroneous results. And grossing is another important aspect. If you don't gross the capsule of a thyroid properly, the invasion may be missed and lead to a wrong diagnosis. So these specimens have to be fixed properly, they have to be grossed properly, margins have to be inked and then processed to give a quality report. A routine histopathology, 80 to 85% of the histopathology can be made on morphology alone, on H&D, by an experienced histopathologist. So, a routine tray may run with a tuberculous granuloma, an intradermal nevus, a renal cell carcinoma, a maturation arrest in a testis, a chondroblastoma of a bone, an infiltrating duct carcinoma of breast, or a papillary thyroid carcinoma. But in certain things, we need to do a few more ancillary tests to make a diagnosis beyond morphology. This is a soft tissue tumor in a young adult where you raise a differential diagnostic possibilities and do the appropriate immunohistochemistry and confirm by molecular studies to make a diagnosis of a synovial sarcoma. Adenoid cystic carcinoma may be simple enough, but some of the morphological variants may warrant an immunohistochemistry to make a final diagnosis. Sometimes the challenge is much more, and it is a poorly differentiated malignancy in a prostate. You have a different adenocarcinomas are common, but here there is a possibility of a sarcoma also in this. So you extend the panel of immunohistochemistry and finally resolve the diagnosis. In this case, it was a stromal sarcoma, high grade of the prostate. This diagnosis and this extended panel of immunohistochemistry is important because the treatment and prognosis of these two entities are very different. Similarly, we need to differentiate an endocervical from an endometrioid carcinoma because of the treatment implications. Sometimes we do get exotic cases, unusual lesions in unusual sites, and we really need to read, do the literature survey, consult with colleagues, seek the opinion of the subspecialty experts to make a diagnosis. This is such case, a borderline serous papillary tumor of testis, and this is another case of a pseudomyogenic hemangioendothelioma, which is rare. It occurs in soft tissues, but here this tumor was from a bone acromion, and then it was on a limited biopsy. So you have to be aware of these possibilities when you see the histopathology to give a proper report. Because of the unusual nature and rarity of these lesions, the clinician also has to be informed about these diagnoses because they also have to refer to the treatment modalities for such rare lesions. Sometimes the morphology may be very similar or close between two entities which are very different. Supposing you need to differentiate a plasmablastic lymphoma from a plasmacytoma in an extradural cord compression because the treatment is very different, prognosis is different. Similarly, you have to differentiate a polyastotic fibrous dysplasia from a psammomatous ossifying fibroma because a fibrous dysplasia polyastotic can have a hereditary syndrome and there can be a possibility of sarcomas occurring in that, whereas a psammomatous ossifying fibroma is a benign entity. And we have to keep abreast of the recent advances that are happening in our field. Now there is so much of molecular information about the classification of gliomas. Now here is one example of an oligodendroglioma. Morphology, it was an oligodendroglioma. By immunohistochemistry, it is IDH mutated. But the FISH results are different. It shows only 1P loss and 19Q retained. So it doesn't fulfill the criteria for the designation of an oligodendroglioma. So according to C-impact now, you have to call it as a diffuse glioma, not elsewhere classified, because the biologic behavior of this entity still we do not know. So you may have to do an ATRX and resolve the issue, or wait and see. This patient has to be followed up. Similarly, this is an anaplastic astrocytoma. IDH is negative by immunohistochemistry. But because of the age of the patient, younger age of the patient, you have to advise the sequencing of IDH, and you should not label it as IDH wild type based only on immunohistochemistry. So these are the important things that we have to keep up to date with whatever is happening in the world. And not only limited to the tumors, we have difficulties in other aspects also. Now this is a child who presented with seizures and CT showed a ring enhancing lesion. It was excised because he was not responding to antituberculous treatment. It was a brain abscess in which there was a parasite. Cysticercus is the common parasitic abscess that we see in the brain, but here this is different from cysticercus. So we have ultimately we discussed with the other people, and then the final diagnosis was asparaginnosis. This is reported or geographically more restricted to the Far East, and it is very uncommon in India. And we have similarly a female child presenting with proximal muscle weakness. Except for mild variation on the size on H&E, there was no significant abnormality on the routine H&E. But on NADH, there were central codes, and on MGT, there were Nemelin rods. So whether it is a single gene mutation giving to different phenotypic abnormalities, how is it going to behave? Will it behave like a central core disease or like an Emelin rod myopathy? What is the molecular basis for this? These things have to be debated, and the clinician has to be alerted to the possible underlying molecular abnormality and the likely biologic behavior of these entities. So, to give an accurate, a scientifically accurate report, we need to discuss the difficult cases with seniors, not necessarily by age, whoever is good in the subject, with the experts, colleagues in the department, subspecialty experts. We talk to clinician or the radiologist to get more information, read, do additional tests as required. Ultimate responsibility for the final decision rests with the pathologist who signs the report. Report signed by junior pathologist should be co-signed by senior pathologist till the former gets a level of maturity, experience and confidence, and take pride and responsibility in signing a report, because report should be fair, prudent and clear, and it should help in treatment decisions. A vague report or a defensive kind of a reporting will not help anybody. Seeking help is not a weakness. So wherever there is a problem, it needs to be discussed and it has to be resolved. We do get sometimes when we give a report, it may not agree with the clinical presentation or may not be what is described in the books. Or with this report, with the diagnosis, the patient may not respond to the standard mode of therapy. So the clinician may ask for a review of the slide. If you have reported it and you are reviewing, it is okay. You may read and then discuss and other things. Sometimes it may be submitted elsewhere for a second opinion, and they may give a professional and an objective opinion. But when the opinion is sought from one pathologist is asked to review the report given by another pathologist in the same department, then this is a delicate matter. It has to, and it is a sensitive matter. It has to be handled with care, maturity, and honesty. So the first pathologist has to be informed of this, and you review, and especially if there is a change in diagnosis, it may be because of more material is submitted to you and when the disease has progressed, or there is more clinical information, the morphology is more specific, you have access to immunohistochemistry, electron microscopy, or molecular tests. And this change in diagnosis, sometimes this discrepancy in diagnosis can also be due to dividing the sample and submitting it in two places. One may get only necrotic material, another may get the tumor. So there can be a false interpretation on these kind of things, and it should be avoided at all costs. And we have to keep this in mind when we are giving, and we should refrain from gossip and not talk about such kind of things. The change in diagnosis may also be due to an expertise and experience of the second pathologist. But whatever may be the change in diagnosis, or whether you agree or you give an expert opinion, it needs to be discussed with the first pathologist, get a consensus, and then you should communicate to the clinician. This is very important for harmony within the department. So it should be based on mutual respect, understanding and trust, and communication helps in avoiding misunderstanding, embarrassment and criticism. However much we try and other things, mistakes do happen, and to accept a mistake may be embarrassing. But still, when you remember that you are doing for patient's interest are the ultimate, then you will treat it as a learning experience. Frozen sections and FNAC reports should be audited against final histopathology report, and ideally, wherever possible, pathologists who report the frozen and FNAC preferably not report the final histopathology, especially if you have more number of pathologists in the department. And every pathologist is an intellectual entitled to his or her own opinion, and disagreement in diagnosis should not go beyond the discussion table and certainly not beyond the department. So when you have given a different opinion or whatever according to your expertise and other things, you should not talk about the opinion given by the other pathologist. Refrain from gossip and criticism. uphold the dignity and reputation of the department. These are very, very important for ethical practice in pathology. This incomplete clinical details is, I think all of us deal with it. It happens day in and day out to all of us, and it will happen in the future also. So we should know how to circumvent these things. This is a second opinion slide review that was submitted for a 3-year-old male child with a retroperitoneal tumor. That is the only information, and it was a core biopsy. Clinical diagnosis was a neuroblastoma. So here when we see this, there is, it is not a neuroblastoma. We are not seeing the homocyte rosettes or the neuropil. There were small round cells, some spindle cells, and then there were these large cells which are the rhabdomyoblasts. We do not know the site of this. We confirmed these rhabdomyoblasts by Desmin and Mayodi. You know that rhabdomyoblasts can occur in a number of tumors in the retroperitoneum. It can be a Wilms tumor can show a skeletal muscle differentiation, or a Wilms tumor treated can show a skeletal muscle differentiation, or it may be a rhabdoid tumor, or it may be rhabdomyosarcoma. So we run a number of immunopanels in this, and we ask for more details from the patient. Patient promptly brings a CT of the chest, which is not useful for us. Then we request him to get all the details and other things. Then he gets the CT of the abdomen. Even when we can see and make out some things, it is always better that the radiology films, that the CTs and MRI be interpreted by your own radiologist, and you don't make these decisions. So now these images were interpreted, and now the kidney is free, and there is a large soft tissue mass in the suprarenal area. So then we reviewed our WT1 again, and then if it is a Wilms tumor, because it is not a Wilms, if it is a Wilms, WT1 should be strong nuclear. In a RMS, it will be strong cytoplasmic, because this is showing a strong cytoplasmic positivity. This case was ultimately resolved as a rhabdomyosarcoma. Why I am illustrating this case is, it is very important to make the diagnosis of a rhabdomyosarcoma, because the treatment is different from that of a Wilms tumor, and we should be aware of the differential diagnostic possibilities, and it will make a difference to the treatment and prognosis. This is another case where it was sent for a squash, and then this thing with a medulloblastoma with a drop metastasis. It was an enhancing nodular lesion in the fourth ventricle, but the morphology was classical of a pilocytic astrocytoma. So we have no problem in making a diagnosis of a pilocytic astrocytoma, WHO grade 1 fourth ventricular. But because they said it is a medulloblastoma with drop metastasis, we thought that maybe there is one more tumor in the spine, and it is better to review. But if there are multiple tumors, it may be a neurofibromatosis associated. So we talked to the surgeon, and then he told us that there are multiple lesions in the lateral ventricle and in the suprasellar region, and in the spine also there were multiple enhancing nodular lesions near the neural foramina. And when we asked for a review if there are any subcutaneous nodules, he said that at D7 level there was a subcutaneous nodule. So the patient was re-examined, and there were subcutaneous nodules and cephalospots, and the mother was having multiple neurofibromas. So this now the diagnosis is that it is a pilocytic astrocytoma, WHO grade 1 neurofibromatosis associated, because patient was having multiple lesions. So what are the implications of diagnosis in this? So patients with NF1 associated tumors are at risk of additional brain tumors, and radiotherapy to be avoided wherever possible, as it increases the risk of brain tumors another 3-fold and 9-fold increased risk of secondary sarcomas like MPNST, and patient also needs a genetic counseling. So be proactive and a member of the team to make these diagnoses. Having said all these things, with best of intentions and everything, mistakes can happen. There may be a misinterpretation, there may be overdiagnosis or an underdiagnosis. Overdiagnosis, like a carcinoma breast diagnosed on FNAC may undergo a mastectomy, or aneurysmal bone cyst with mitosis and osteoid may be misinterpreted as an osteosarcoma, or a myositis ossificans may be interpreted as an osteosarcoma, and it may result in amputation. And so the radical surgeries, unnecessary chemotherapy and radiotherapy, and the complications of therapy, all these can occur. Though the mistake, so these happen, though rarely, but they can happen. They can happen, and we have to be very vigilant and cautious about these things. Sometimes there may be underdiagnosis, that is, the picture may not be clear, or a pathologist may miss a diagnostic feature. So it may result in delayed diagnosis, increase in stage, delayed treatment, and maybe death also. So we have to be very careful about these aspects. So whenever there is a misinterpretation and a wrong report, there will be issues of responsibility. You have made this diagnosis, so we have done this surgery, such kind of things. It becomes personal. There will be ego and blame and other things, criticism, judgmental, all these things. These are very unpleasant and other things. So the trust and truth are two pillars of a strong relationship. This is what we should have with our clinician. That rapport has to be maintained at every point of time. If you don't trust a person, you won't speak truth. And if you don't say the truth, the person won't trust you. So if there is a mistake, always you should admit the mistake and say this is what has happened. If it can be corrected or damage can be minimized, we have to take care of this. So a discussion and a shared decision making are very important in pathology practice. What is integrity? That is, you should have a consistent behavior based on principles in all situations towards all people. You should have a fair knowledge of what is right versus what is wrong. This comes with experience and maturity, and that is what actually defines a person. It is not that easy all the time to say this is right, this is wrong, but you be truthful and be honest, and you should take responsibility for the decisions that you make. So these traits in academic life lead to a trusting environment, productive work, and better relationships. So if you have integrity, you need not bother about anybody else. If you don't have integrity, nobody will bother about you. Usually, the communication between a patient and a pathologist is through the clinician. You give the report to the clinician, and the clinician will decide the management, and he will communicate that with the patient. So for a patient, pathologist is an anonymous person. It is a lab. For a pathologist, patient is anonymous and it is a number. But we should not shirk a responsibility. We should take it as if I am completing one tray of reporting and going away. You have to take each slide as important as if you are dealing with a patient, and you have to put your entire experience and skill in making that report. So the communication part is very important. Nowadays, we do get samples directly to the laboratory, and the patients or the attendants may come to collect the reports. So this changing practice, that is, the reports are conveyed directly to the patient or the attendant, and these bring new ethical considerations. So we are not trained to talk to the patients what to communicate, how to communicate, with whom to communicate, because in India we have lots of friends and relatives. Anybody will come to collect a report. And so it leads to the patient confidentiality and the information in the report, and sometimes if it is a malignancy, that information directly goes to a patient or an attendant. And our patients or attendants also may be educated. They do a Google search and they ask you all sorts of questions, and if you are not ready to answer, it's the best to say that you take the report to the referring clinician, and they will explain you what has to be done and other things. That is the best way to do. If you leave it to, and then who should talk to a patient also is very important, because if you leave it to a junior person, you do not, because they may not know what to talk also. So these have to be taken seriously and responsibly. Once on a busy day in NIMS, I was reporting even at 6 o'clock in the evening with a resident. All the regular staff have already gone by that time. A patient's attendant came anxiously for a report, and he was asking and he was demanding a report. So I asked the resident to go get the slides and the form. And that boy went and looked for the slides. He didn't get the slides. So instead of reporting back to me, he went and told the attendant that your slides are lost, your form is misplaced, and as and when we find it, we will report. So, and you can imagine the rest of the things. So that is why you should not, you should know who to talk to the patients, attendants and other things, and how to talk and what to talk. This communication is very important, and these new ethical considerations all of us have to be aware. And also the tissues and blocks are patient's property, and if a patient asks for tissues and blocks, you have to return them to the patient, and denying the patient's right would be tantamount to malpractice. Earlier the guidelines were not very clear, and pathologists were not parting with the slides and blocks, but now we have clear guidelines from NABL and others. So if a patient asks for a sample or anything, we have to return that. And another important thing is the sample submitted is for diagnosis only. If it has to be used for a research, a study, or any other thing, you need to take permission from the patient. A consent of the patient is very important, and also it has to be approved by the institutional ethics committee. And confidentiality of the patient has to be protected at all the time, and our systems are not really that good, they are not very much in place. So but you have to really maintain the confidentiality, and any identifiable patient information has to be secure, and there should be restricted access to the laboratory, and you have to ensure the dignity of the patient. And if you moving on to research now, if you want to do any study, even on the archival specimens and all, informed consent is very important, especially in research, and patient's personal information should be de-identified, and consent even on the stored sample also you have to get the consent. So if a patient can withdraw the consent at any time, and if they don't give a consent, you should not go ahead with the study. And especially genetic testing for hereditary diseases and stem cell research, there have to be separate informed consent has to be in place. What is research integrity? It is our way of thinking and how we conduct the research study, because the results have to be honest and trustworthy. So right from planning of the research to conduct of the data acquisition, analysis, interpretation, storing of the data, and publication, everything has to be done meticulously, and all these documents and everything has to be kept properly. So you may start with a hypothesis and you expect some result. When you plan a study, you may, and the methods that you use or the technique that you use, you plan something, but the results may be different. Even if it is a negative result or it is contrary to what you thought initially, you should report it honestly. Even a negative report should help. We started a study on, we try to, because most of the samples for fungal infection for a diagnosis of a fungal infection were submitted to histopathology, and not all the samples were submitted to culture. So the treatment decisions were made on histopathology alone. So because culture is considered gold standard, we thought we will compare our histopathology diagnosis to the wherever there is a culture to those things. And then we found that 8% of the cases there was a discrepancy in the results. We reported that, and then to overcome that, to differentiate between Demotechius and Aspergillus, because that was the most common mistake that was happening, or overdiagnosis of Aspergillus was happening. So then we thought that we will do a melanin stain to circumvent that problem. But to our surprise, even the culture proven Aspergillus has shown melanin positivity. So we know, but we reported even that negative result, and then we went ahead and did immunohistochemistry to resolve the issue, and ultimately the entire thing was to increase the diagnostic accuracy of fungal infection on histopathology. So that is how, even if the result is negative, you highlight the limitation of the technique or the method, and then you publish the result. Similarly, we did an MHC to differentiate idiopathic inflammatory myopathies from dystrophies, and similarly the other things. Who should be an author and why authorship matters? These are very important. A person who gives a substantial contribution to the concept, design of the work, acquisition, analysis, and interpretation of data, drafting and critically evaluating for important intellectual content. People who do these things are eligible to be authors. The authorship, why it matters is it confers credit. It also gives responsibility and accountability, because you just cannot say that this is this, this is this. And also now there is, it has a academic value also, because unless you publish so many papers, you are not eligible for a promotion. And if it is a research work with a patent and other things, it may have financial implications. So all these things have to be taken properly and seriously. you should not have a misrepresentation. That is, you should not include people who have not contributed substantially. You should not dole out an authorship to anybody, or at the same time, it should not be based on an affiliation because somebody is a head of the department or a head of a unit. You should not give an authorship. They should have contributed significantly to the research work. That is very important. And also plagiarism. This also has to be avoided. A dual publication is always discouraged. That is, same manuscript you should not simultaneously submit to two journals. If there is a delay in processing, no response from one journal, you have to withdraw it from that, confirm it, and then only submit it to another journal. Simultaneously, it should not be processed for two journals. And also authorship of the thesis, this I will elaborate, because if it is, whether it is a DNB, a MD, a PhD, anything, if it is a thesis or a dissertation, always the student has to be the first author, irrespective of this. And there are deviations to this which I have seen in my own experience, that many people publishing a student thesis in their name, which should not be done. And it is very important to collaborate in our research work. It is not in your own institute or in the place you are working, you may not have all the facilities. So extend your hand, take help, collaborate with the other institutes. Being in Nizam's Institute of Medical Sciences, I had the ample opportunity to collaborate with so many institutions that are there in Hyderabad and also outside Hyderabad with NIMHANS. In Bangalore, I had the opportunity to collaborate. So we published a large series of mucormycosis of the brain by collaborating with NIMHANS. We collaborated with University of Hyderabad, CDFD, Institute of Genetics, and also with several departments in the other hospitals also apart from NIMS. And this has enabled us to contribute chapters, to edit books, and also contribute significantly to the scientific knowledge on fungal infections, muscle, and other areas. So, and also we had opportunity by collaboration, we could do some of the basic work which we were not having in our institute. So it is just not providing a sample. You have to be part of that scientific team. So we have by microarray we have done immunohistochemistry, validated many proteins, scored them, and then we in gliomas we did a lot of work on the archival specimens. And similarly in muscle, in mitochondrial myopathies, we contributed significant. We collaborated with CCMB and LV Prasad Eye Institute, and then we did a good work on genetics in mitochondrial myopathy, and also in dystrophy with Institute of Genetics. So not only diagnosing and research and other things, it is important that we share and disseminate knowledge. This is very, very important for education and research. So we participate, contribute, and then listen to others, and then organize conferences. All these form very important aspects in academic life. So the Hyderabad Academy of Pathologists has started with that initiative only, learning pathology together. So it was a huge success, the first conference, and that is the way to go forward. We have conducted the first conference of Neuropathology Society of India, and after that we have taken an initiative of traveling school of neuropathology, because in most of the medical colleges the neuropathology services are at very basic minimum. So people who are actively practicing neuropathology, we formed a group and a team, and we went to the medical colleges and we conducted CMEs. So these are the initiatives that you take to share and disseminate knowledge. So education is time bound, but learning is a lifelong process. So you help guide and teach students to convert the information into knowledge and wisdom, either by discussion of a specimen or a slide, or by sharing a set of slides and other things. But this learning is a lifelong process. As long as we practice, we have to be relevant. To be relevant, we have to be learning. If you stop learning, you stop living. So to conclude, ethics and integrity in pathology practice and research are mainly, these are useful to protect the interest of the patient, and patient safety and privacy have to be protected, and these have to be governed by policy, that is ethics. So you have to provide a quality report, use your skills to provide a quality report, and you have to be honest and truthful, and integrity, it has to be maintained, and you should take part in education and research to this. I'm very inspired these words, unleash your best work every day and die empty. So I think that is a very beautiful way of living life. I owe all my experiences and for what I am today to these two great institutions, Nizam's Institute of Medical Sciences and Basavatarakam Indo-American Cancer Hospital and Research Institute, where I am presently working. And I thank the Hyderabad Academy of Pathologists for giving me this opportunity, and I pay my respects to Mrs. Basavatarakam for this great honor. Thank you very much.
So the idea of the Hyderabad Academy of Pathologists, this oration should have taken place in April, but because of the lockdown and following restrictions, we could not take it forward. But then we thought that it has to go online, and people have to learn from these teachers who are inspiring, and we have to all imbibe the knowledge that they have gained over the years. And so HAP has taken this initiative. So at the outset, I would like to thank Dr. T.S. Rao sir, the Medical Director of Basavatarakam Indo-American Cancer Hospital, for the kind support and encouragement to have ever since the oration was instituted. And the format is like we would have the felicitation at this time. The recording of this would be beamed on November 20th. After Madam's oration, and we will have the introduction also live, just to keep the live format also alive. But obviously, because of the social distancing norms, we cannot have a very elaborate felicitation. So we have taken all precautions, and with the kind help of the management, we have been able to bring this together. So may I request Dr. Swarnalata, President of Hyderabad Academy of Pathologists, to please grace the dais. I request Dr. T. Subramanieshwar Rao, Medical Director of Basavatarakam Indo-American Cancer Hospital. I request Dr. Sushila, Head of Pathology, to please come over to the dais. I request Dr. R.V. Prabhakar Rao, CEO of the hospital, to please grace the dais. And may I request the dignitary, the star of the show, the Honorable Speaker, my Reverend Teacher, with utmost respect, I request Dr. Sundaram to please come onto the dais. I request a loud applause.
deeply honored and deeply humbled by this honor. I thank Hyderabad Academy of Pathologists and the Basavatarakam Indo-American Cancer Hospital for bestowing this honor on me. I particularly thank Dr. Swarnalita, Dr. Sudha, Dr. Shushila, Dr. T.S. Chavagaru, and the entire management of Basavatarakam Institute and all the executive and members we have. And thank you for your response. Thank you.
A lot more would be spoken about Madam, and you must listen to her that day. It's a responsibility, and I'm sure you really learn a lot more than just pathology.
Thank you all for listening to this wonderful audition. How our challenges as pathologists go beyond the microscope. How to work with colleagues, with patients, with our specimens, and to be honest, integral, and humble at all times, whether you're young or old. And I understand that many of the participants were not able to log in the beginning, some technical glitch, but we innovate as we go along. So contrary to the usual procedure, I would once again introduce Dr. Sundaram, who has just rendered this audition, because I think all of us need to know about her career, how much she has worked, and how all of what she has said in this audition was actually something which she applied to the work that she did. So just a few words again about Dr. Sundaram. She completed her MBBS and MD at Andhra Medical College, moved over to Hyderabad as her first posting, I think, was at the Gandhi Medical College as assistant professor. But very soon, the Nizam's Institute of Medical Sciences was just coming up then in Hyderabad. I think it was probably in 85, 86. And Dr. Sundaram joined there. And probably she was amongst the first few pathologists in the state to take up a specialty, to take up neuropathology as an area of interest, went abroad, trained, and set up a fantastic facility at NIMS, and also raised the standard of neuropathology in the country. Her academic achievements, as you have seen in this audition, are just mind-boggling. Over 350 papers, edited 3 books, contributed 24 chapters, and innumerable number of platform presentations. This audition, which you just heard, is just one of the many, many auditions that Dr. Sundaram has delivered. You can see that she has never shunned her responsibilities, and that is evident from the fact that she took up many posts, and she in academic bodies and societies. She was the president of Neuropathology Society of India and past president of IAPM, both the state and the national bodies. But those of who, and she never rested when she retired from Nizam's, as you can see. She's continuing even more vigorously and stronger in her academics than she has ever been, and thus being a role model for all of us in pathology. But those of us who know her well, above all, I think, and those who have worked with her, know her as a very warm, compassionate person, extremely disciplined, a stand no nonsense type of person, very upright, as you can see, and very, very passionate about what she does. I think it is these qualities in her which endear all of us to her, and which made her the most appropriate person for delivering this very, very, what shall I say, this audition, which has truly stimulated all of us. All of us have a message to take back from this in our daily practice, so that I think we as pathologists are considered a very ethical and a very integral specialty in medicine. So thank you once again, all of those who attended it. And I do hope we can have more such sessions at this Hyderabad Academy. And I hand over to Dr. Sudha, who will give the concluding remarks. Thank you once again.
Thank you, ma'am. I thank all the delegates who have participated in large numbers, and let me apologize upfront for the technical glitch that has taken place initially. This is the online world. Nevertheless, we've been able to come back with a bang. And thanks to Dr. Sundaram's oration, this program has been a major success. We're getting very good feedback in the chat box. And thank you all. We want the youngsters also to join and make this platform a very interactive one. We are looking forward to more of these academic sessions in near future from HAP. And we would request the youngsters, the young pathologists that are coming up to join this platform and contribute effectively. Thank you, everyone. I thank the HAP Executive Committee led by Dr. Swarnalata, Dr. Tara Roshni Paul, Dr. Tapadia, Dr. I. Satish Rao, and myself, the secretary. I thank myself as well, and the management of Basavatarkam Indo-American Cancer Hospital, which has really helped us right from the beginning of this oration. And lastly, but not the least, I thank Mr. K. Rohit, who has helped us with the technical execution of this oration. Thank you so much. Thank you all.